You're listening to the AmWritingFantasy podcast. In today's publishing landscape, you can reach fans all over the world. Query letters are a thing of the past. You don't even need a literary agent. There is nothing standing in the way of making a living from writing. Join two best-selling authors who have self-published more than 20 books between them. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Autumn Burt and Jasper Schmidt.
Hello, I'm Jesper, and this is episode 92 of the AmWritingFantasy podcast. And while Autumn is busy taking care of some of our other activities today, I'll have a conversation with Lisa Marie, and I have to say that this is one that I've been looking forward to, because you see, it's not often that one gets to talk to someone who has a PhD in creative writing with world building as one of the critical components. That's amazing, and I'm looking very much forward to this. Welcome to the AmWritingFantasy podcast, Lisa Marie.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So maybe you could start out just by telling us a bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm actually not yet a PhD, so just to correct you, I'm actually doing PhD research right now. I've had a pretty diverse life. I was an entrepreneur for a long time. I had my own e-commerce business, and I sold that in 2015, which allowed me to retire and do my dream job, which is, of course, writing novels. And as part of when I was writing novels, it turned out that we were going to have to come to Scotland for a few years to look after my mother-in-law. And I decided to go back to school. So I went back and got my master's in creative writing, and then I was encouraged to move on to get my PhD. So there's two parts of a PhD in a practice-based creative writing degree, and that is writing a novel to its natural length. So I'm writing a dystopian fiction novel, which is about 120,000 words, and also writing an accompanying critical thesis, which is about 40,000 words. So I'm working on that right now. I have about a year left.
Is there like a specific focus you have to do with your PhD rather than, well, I understand writing a novel, but do you have to like do a more theoretical focus on something specific?
Yes. So normally when people do a practice-based research degree and they're writing a novel, they do what's called an exegesis, which is kind of an examination of your creative writing practice. But I decided I wanted to go a little bit further. I'm very interested in the self-publishing world and why the self-publishing world has not yet sort of reached its tendrils into the academic and more formal literary critique community. So I decided to do my the critical component as research focusing on redefining the role of the author in this post-press genre fiction world. So the digital economy, of course, has been the key to allowing all of us to be able to express ourselves through self-publishing. And I was interested in really examining how the role of the author has changed beyond the traditional publishing community. And I theorize that authorship in the future is going to have to follow a more collaborative model, and that there has been such an evolution for three components of this collaborative model, which is the author, the reader, and the text. Over the last 20 years primarily. And so we have to, as authors, move along with the changes that have been happening in the publishing environment, in the post-press environment. And world building is a huge part of that. It cannot be ignored that the text is no longer a single, isolated narrative. It's now usually, especially obviously in science fiction and fantasy, simply a gateway into a larger world. So it's the combination of the author as self-publisher, the reader as what I call a creator reader, which is kind of an extension of the early adopter who is the fan, and the world, which is the extension of a single narrative into a multi-narrative transmedia environment. if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think originally when I heard you talking about collaboration, I was sort of thinking like moving into a world where it would be more common for authors to co-create their stories, which for certainly, at least in self-publishing, that has been an ongoing trend for the last couple of years. But actually, I think you're sort of talking a bit about something else here, not really about whether or not there are several authors co-creating stuff, but more, I guess, the triangle between the actual work and the writer and the reader. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, co-creation between authors is most certainly something that is, should be examined further. But I'm specifically looking more to co-creation between the author and the reader and the world environment. So it's really between the author and the reader that I find more interesting, because I would say that the fan is the early adopter of this role that I've coined creator reader. And that's the individual who is spurred beyond the activity of meaning making when reading fiction and into the activity of creator. And that's been going on for 100 years, the fan community. But now I'm theorizing that that is going to turn into a more of a mainstream requirement of genre fiction readers, and that the author has to prepare themselves for that and also provide the environment, even the physical environment as well, within which this creator reader can express themselves. So it's a co-creation between the author and the reader, as well as it is between this triangle that you're discussing, the author, the reader, and the world.
Right. So are you thinking in terms of, because we live in a very social media kind of environment nowadays, and we
Correct.
have a lot of ways to express ourselves. I mean, people can run their own YouTube channels or do podcasts like this one or whatever they want. So are you thinking in the sense that we're moving into it being more commonplace that fans of, let's say, certain book series or whatever will create their own content in relation to that book series? Is that sort of the line of thinking?
Absolutely, that's exactly the line of thinking that I'm going down. It in the past, in the in the late 20th century, reading was really considered to be a very private expression of taste. So it was something that people did alone and in the quiet. And social reading began in the late 20th century, primarily with book clubs beginning to rise in popularity. And then, of course, the digital economy exploded social reading opportunities. And it's from this social reading environment that readers have this, not all readers, right? This is a small portion of the general reading population, have this desire to actually create. And I'm positing that it's the author's responsibility to, in the self-publishing environment, in the genre fiction environment specifically, to provide opportunities for the author, for the reader to move into that creation space.
Yeah, so this automatically already sparked like two questions in me because
Okay.
one question is, so how do you propose that the author both prepare themselves to do that, and also how do we create an environment whereby the readers can actually get to co-create in the setting as we please, or is it not something we have to worry about other than they will sort of find their own way in this social media environment? That was sort of one question. And I guess the other question is, have you had any thoughts about, because there is some sort of copyright licensing problems here as well, I guess, that we need to maybe think about, or maybe you think that it's not necessary and this is just a new world we are looking at now, or what do you think?
Yeah. So to your first question, the third part of my thesis really kind of addresses an imagined process that a collaborative author could follow in order to provide this kind of environment that we're talking about. So in traditional literary theory, this type of co-creation technically happens with literary reading. So the theory says that that a reader narratively co-creates a narrative with an author in their mind when they are doing really, deep literary reading, and that this co-creation is virtual, and that's what reader response theory really is. It's that the reader is creating something from the text, and the text no longer belongs to the author. So we'll talk about that in your copyright question next. But my theory is that genre reading is obviously not literary reading. It's considered passive reading, which is probably an incorrect title for that kind of reading. My theory is that the co-creation that happens virtually in a literary read needs to happen in real life and physically in a genre read. So it is the author's job to create that kind of environment, in my theory. And so, yes, in the third chapter, I talk about from the very beginning how a genre fiction author should make sure that they are engaging the reader in 3 different points to make sure that that reader becomes moves into this creator reader role, which is the optimal role for an author, in my theory, both economically and aesthetically, because it provides economic advantages to a self-published author, because when you have those 1,000 true fans, you really have a group of readers that will stick with you in your world and your series, above and beyond. They'll become your one-click group. And then also aesthetically, it serves an author because it gives an author the opportunity to experience the kind of artistic growth that they perhaps would not have if they were to shut themselves off from this opportunity to collaborate with their readership, if that makes sense. So the
Yeah,
theory
yeah, it does. Yeah,
Yeah, so the
go ahead.
theory is to engage with the readers on in 3 levels. One is socially and community, so begins at the very beginning, start to build your community. And a lot of people, self-published authors, are doing all of this already. I'm just basically putting it into the academic context. Engage them in your text. So what is it you're doing within your gateway text to engage and encourage creator readers? And then also engaging them in the expanded text, which becomes the story world. So that process is what I'm kind of developing as the last stage of my critical thesis component.
Right, because well, I feel like, I love it myself when a fictional world feels like it really grabs your attention, right? And it pulls you in, and you sort of want to explore more of that setting as a whole, right? And it basically grows beyond the story itself. So I for sure love that kind of thing. And I know, of course, many fantasy readers love that sort of thing as well. I just had a reflection about what you said about building the community, and having that the reader as the co-creator and whatnot. But in
Mhm.
today's world, I just feel like everybody is so busy, and there is so many social media contexts. There's so many groups. If you decide, for example, to run a Facebook group, do you have any reflections about how do we get people to actually engage and start on this co-creation?
Sure. I mean, we look to fandom is what we do, and that's actually what I'm doing in my research. Look deeply into fandom and figure out what is it about these particular texts or these particular story worlds that drag these fans into the position where they're obsessed. Now, not every reader is ever going to be in a fandom. Like, there are people who will never become creator readers, and that's fine. And though you'll still have those readers, and those readers will still be engaged, but the ones that you want to look for are those fans that will become these super super obsessed is the wrong word, but super engaged, right? The
The
super
true fans. I like the true
yes,
fan
the
concept.
1,000 true fans. You'll get your
Yeah.
1,000 true fans, and those are your creator readers. So yes, everyone is obviously very busy. There's a bazillion Facebook pages you can follow. There's, the newsletter fatigue with authors is very, very real. And so that is exactly what my research is looking into. Where are the points that you can engage your readership throughout the process of writing and production, distribution, and reception of a novel? And those are the 3 points are the ones that I discussed. So the social and community, and the biggest point in the first step is to find your beta reading community and engage your beta reading community, not necessarily as simply people who are just going to read the book and give you reviews, which is, I think, what a lot of self-published authors treat their beta reader community as, but engage your beta reader community from the very beginning as co-authors, not in any sort of credit, or copyright wise, but people who you turn to make sure that from the very first word you write on the page, these people are involved. And I've actually done that with the novel that I'm writing for this particular degree. So you get a group of beta readers and you don't just ask them the questions like, did you like the novel and do you want to review it? You ask them the really deep questions about what's missing, what didn't you understand, what should I add, what did you not like? So that's the first step of real engagement. And those are the core of what's going to become your creator readership. And then obviously in the next stage, which is within the text, there's a lot of intertextual world building techniques that authors can use to encourage this type of engagement. And a lot of it has to do with making sure you're very, very careful about the type of backstory that you include within your book. A lot of fantasy and science fiction readers go really overboard on backstory, and leaving gaps is one of the most essential things for intertextual engagement, making sure that there are places where readers really feel that they can step in and have something to contribute. So even though you may know what happens with this particular character, or you may know the backstory of this particular event, making sure that either you don't share it or you encourage your readership to complete that backstory for you. So that sort of leads into the world building aspect, which is I have created a physical world environment. So I looked at several options for this. Archivos is a fantastic online tool for exploring world relationships. It's really fabulous. It didn't work in the end for me because I needed a lot more space for text. So I moved to World Anvil, which is also fabulous and works really well for a lot of science fiction and fantasy folks, but again, didn't really do what I needed it to do for what I'm theorizing. So I moved into a tool called Rome Research, and it's a fabulous tool. It's brand new. It just came out at the end of 2019. And I'm actually going to be developing some courses for Rome Research in how to use it in a creative writing environment, because it's really, really powerful. Giving readers that environment, that post-read, so after the immersive experience of the narrative, they can step out of the single text, which I'm calling a gateway text. There can be multiple gateway texts that lead into the story world, and into the story world with the author specifically not being the end all be all, decider for what happens within that world environment. I mean, it's probably even valuable for an author to step away from the world at that point and pass it on to, I'm speaking business speak here, but that's my background. A product manager who says, okay, this world now belongs to you. What is it that you want to do with it? And then the author can step back in to write another text, from their own perspective and their own point of view. So to your copyright issue, fandom traditionally is very anti-commercial. The fandom environment is anti-commercial, but part of that is because they had to be anti-commercial because early efforts at publishing fandoms for commercial benefit, fandom text for commercial benefits, were really slammed by the traditional publishing industry. So in order to protect themselves, fandoms often proclaim this like anti-commercialism. But I think there is a desire within the fandom community, and I think we're seeing that in self-publishing specifically, in the science fiction and fantasy world, for fans to be able to contribute to a world and benefit economically. And so there is a model, there is an economic model that an author can develop whereby it benefits both the author and the reader, economically and aesthetically.
It's very interesting, and I'm just thinking here as well because I can't remember, maybe it was like 10, 20 episodes ago or something like that. We had Mer Lafferty on, who she's written novels for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Because and it's interesting and comparing what she said to what you're saying, because with Star Wars, for example, that's also a massive universe, obviously, and the lore there is really expansive, but she basically said like, okay, so when I have to write for Star Wars, they give me like these very very strict guidelines on what I can do and what I cannot do in the setting.
Sure.
Whereas I think what you're saying is basically the opposite. You sort of just release it out into the world, and you guys figure out what happened here or whatever, right? So I think what you're saying is that the fans will just develop the background story or fill in parts of the world that was not really filled in, and the writer or the owner of the work doesn't really, put any restrictions on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the benefits of being a self-publisher, right? I mean, the reason why Star Wars and those other huge franchises are so strict is because the copyright is owned but in an iron-fisted way by the corporation. It's not really about, artistic license. It's about making sure that the corporation can keep the economic benefits, of the expanding world. So one of the benefits of self-publishing is, as an author, I have the capability to say, yes, this is my world that I started, and these are the gateway texts that I have written. But do you know what? There's a benefit in me opening it up and allowing readers and fans to contribute their own versions of the world and the story world. It doesn't mean that the author is giving up control, because the author still has the ultimate word on what gets into the official canon. But it means that the author has this incredible opportunity to co-create with a readership and produce exactly what the readership is looking for, and then also give the advantage to people who perhaps don't have the capability to self-publish themselves, or don't have the business savvy to go out and do all the things that is required in the self-publishing community to get your work out there. The author has the opportunity to also help those people as well, and it will benefit both of them mutually. So perhaps the author takes 20%, 30% of whatever they decide to publish under their story world title, and perhaps they have a free environment where anyone can publish, and it's technically not part of the canon, but they're not going to restrict fans from what they want to add or want to write within that story world. It's only going to benefit the author in the long run. I mean, I don't get into the economic aspect of it very much in my thesis, just because I don't have enough room. But it's my belief that copyright in general is, if you hang on to it too tightly, you're in this environment, in this digital environment, you're restricting the opportunity to spread awareness of your work. So the people who restrict their graphics from being spread, I mean, of course you need to be credited, but people who don't want their art to be spread out on the internet, even though it's credited, I think they're making a big mistake. I think there is a benefit in making people feel as though and actually making people a part of the creative experience.
Yeah, and I like to sort of become very practical here as well because I mean, many of our listeners here, they might be writing their first novel or maybe their first series or something, but they haven't maybe they haven't gotten very far. Maybe they only have, like, let's say 200 people on their email list who they know will actually read it at this point in time. So because I can fully imagine that if you're like George R. R. Martin, for example, and you set up something and say, okay, guys, you can sort of start developing in this part of the world and whatnot, a lot of people will just do it because they would love to. But for the self-published author with maybe a limited audience, how do you think that people would best get started in getting these, uh, what did you call them, creator readers going in creating something?
Well, I mean, I think the number one key is reader engagement. It's absolutely essential from the very beginning. I mean, I wrote prior to moving into my PhD, prior to actually starting my master's, I wrote romantic comedy. And people would say, well, there's no world building in romantic comedy, there's no opportunity for reader engagement. And that's incorrect. Um, the readers of any kind of genre have a desire to be engaged with the author, with the community, and with the story world. So I would say to any author that is just starting out is make sure that you are engaging with your reader community, um, as though they are your friends. I mean, every single email you get, you answer it. Every single request you get for somebody who wants you to read their short story that they've done based on your novel, you you read it and you respond to it. I mean, just because you only have 200 people on your list, I can guarantee that if you have 200 people on your list, you're going to have at least one or two of them send you an email about your work. And you need to make sure that the first step of reader engagement is author and community. So you need to make sure that you are really open and available to your readers, so that they feel like, well, they will have a relationship and a connection with you that carries on into your work.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I fully agree with that as well. And also the whole point about always responding to email. It doesn't have to be about the work, but any email you get from a reader, always respond to it. I fully agree with that. Um, so I guess to some extent, what we are, well, we're sort of talking about making small steps that over the long term will make a big difference, right? In the sense that, okay, if you get one person on board and they will develop, maybe they do a bit of drawings of the settings or whatever because they just like it. I had some readers in the past doing that. They made some of their own artwork of some places in the novel, which was very nice. Or maybe other people would like to do a bit of world building. Another person might want to write a short story elaborating on one of the characters' background. Is that sort of what you're thinking? And then you just encourage that, and you maybe provide some sort of platform where people can post stuff or something like that?
Yeah, sorry, yes, that is exactly right. I mean, I don't address it again in my thesis because I don't have room, but we are living in a transmedia environment. There are multiple opportunities to expand a narrative beyond simply just, writing another story or writing another book into a series. There are opportunities for people to, like you said, draw the settings, draw the characters, write short stories, write poetry, make films. And people are doing that within these fandoms right now, within the big franchise fandoms. So as an author, encouraging that kind of co-creative activity and giving your readers the place to do that, I think is kind of the 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 way forward. And I'm not saying this is anything new. I mean, authors are doing this right now. What I'm doing is putting it into sort of an academic, through an academic lens, so that we can get academia itself as well more interested in this changing role of authorship. I mean, they're still really stuck on this idea of the genius author, this solitary genius author who is inspired and writes this, amazing piece of literature, and then is discovered by the traditional publishing industry. And all of this is really the only legitimate method of authorship, it seems, within the majority of the literary academic community right now. So my goal is to try and get academia and the more traditional community to try and look at authorship a little bit differently, to let go of this concept of genius authorship and copyright. I mean, it's difficult because that has a huge impact on the traditional publishing industry, who's already struggling, with the surge in self-publishing and the changing environment. They're not necessarily technologically savvy. They're not necessarily keeping up with the changes, and they don't have the infrastructure or the methodologies in place to support the kind of co-creative process that I'm talking about. So there is a great deal of resistance, but I think that it's obviously happening out there right now. There are some authors who are extremely good at it and who are doing it. So let's take a look at it from a research perspective and figure out what's working, why, and what it means to literary theory and the literary establishment as we move forward.
Yeah, what I definitely like about it, and I have to admit as well that you are sort of challenging some set beliefs here, right? So I quite like that. But what I do like about what you're saying is, because one of the things that we keep coming back to over and over and over again when we are doing our podcasts, when we are interviewing other authors and so on and so on, we always come back to the problem of visibility. In today's internet-based, always connected kind of world, there is so much stuff out there, especially after self-publishing came through with over the last 10 years or so, maybe a bit less, but there is so many books. If you go to Amazon as well, there's tons of books in every genre. So getting your books to actually become visible to readers, and therefore also, of course, hoping to earn some money, it is one of the most difficult things to do. And one of the things we have always said from our side is that is why the email list is so incredibly important. And
Correct.
it is so important to have that conversation going with the readers, like you have also said here. But I think your input here adds another element to what we usually say in our advice, and that is that if you can get these co-creators, these reader creators, to do work in your world, you'll basically sort of encourage that word of mouth marketing, basically, right? So they will start spreading out across their own social media feeds, and they will share the stuff which, well, hopefully will also lead new readers back to your work at the end. Is my logic here correct?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. Listen, I'm first and foremost a business person. That's my background. I'm an entrepreneur. I built a business from scratch. And so my ideas are very much, economically business focused. And really, it's nothing more than building a brand. So your story world and you, the author, and you become your brand. You make promises to your readers that then you fulfill, right? You find out, you very closely specify who your target reader is. You make promises, to that reader through things like, tropes and genres and stuff like that, and you develop a brand relationship. So yes, it is about using word of mouth just as brands do, and giving readers the opportunity to spread the word about your brand. I know a lot of authors that would feel really gross thinking about it that way, because a lot of, especially in the traditional publishing industry, obviously it's what you write is art. But my premise is that you can still write art and you can still be an artist while taking advantage of what the digital economy is offering you from an economic perspective. So if you were to be building a brand, you would slowly begin gathering your 1,000 true fans, which obviously authors do through social media and their email list, which again, I think is absolutely true. It's the number one most important thing. And making sure that once the reader enters into a relationship with your brand, that's the only place they want to go. So that's why you provide this story world and this opportunity to engage at a level that most traditional methods of authorship don't allow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. But have you, from your personal experience trying to live this stuff, have you had the experience that you can actually get people to co-create, or is it more, or is it a bit like crickets, that you will ask people, encourage them to create something, and then maybe one or two people do that, but nobody else? What's your experience there?
Well, the reason that I started getting really interested in this was watching other authors do it. So I know that it does happen with other authors. When I was writing my romantic comedy, I did have people come in and request to create, wanting to write short stories on the characters, wanting me to expand storylines and gaps that I would then say to them, I don't feel it, that doesn't, there's nothing that resonates with me to expand that, but you go ahead. So yeah, the people do, I truly believe that people do want to do it. One of the unfortunate things about doing a PhD is that it's a 3, 4, 5 year process. And so a lot of the economic exploration I would like to do to test these theories, I can't do because I'm so focused on the actual research and academic aspect on the writing side, because really I'm doing a creative writing degree, not a business or economic degree. So I have to focus on the literary component. But post my PhD, I fully plan on, exploring this at multiple levels, perhaps even starting my own small publishing company where I work with authors who are interested in working this way, and not just in the science fiction and fantasy genre. Like I said to you, I believe that crime fiction is a huge opportunity for people to get engaged in worlds. Romance is a huge opportunity. So yeah, I do think that there I haven't experienced a huge volume of it because, like I said, I'm really focused on the theoretical aspects of it right now. But I think it's out there. There's enough evidence to show. I mean, I don't. You obviously know Michael Anderle, and I interviewed one of his team members for the PhD, and
Hmm.
there are folks who write whole novels that he picks up within his science fiction and fantasy worlds. So it's happening out there right now.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that Autumn and I already have planned is that at some point in the future we would like other authors to write in our setting as well, because our setting is going to be huge and there's going to be a lot of stories you can tell in it, and we cannot tell all of it. So that we want to do anyway. But I still feel like there's a slight distinction between, basically becoming a publishing company, because that's basically what we would become, right? So we would
Yeah.
have our own authors that we have contracts with, and they would write in our setting, but their own stories, obviously, in our setting. So, but that's becoming a publishing company. Whereas on the other hand, there's this whole other element to it, which is more like the fan fiction or the fandom. It doesn't have to be fiction; it could be pictures or videos or whatever people want to make, but that there is no contract there. That's more like just an understanding about and encouraging people to actually create stuff. And then, of course, I guess what would help is if we as authors would help promote that stuff once it's created. If they create a cool video and you have a YouTube channel, maybe you upload it as the author to the YouTube channel, and the person will feel like this is awesome. I got to make a video that came onto the author's YouTube channel or whatever. I'm just making something up here, but I feel like there is two parallel streams here, whereas one of them is about basically more like becoming a publisher, whereas the other one is more about fandom and providing opportunities to fans to express themselves.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying in my thesis is that those two things can merge together, that we're moving from a reading community into a writing community. And so those people who you are talking about as fans or readers actually have the capability to contribute and be authors. And the things that they are creating, the contributions they are creating are worthy enough to be shared under the author's concept of what their world is. So again, it comes down to a conversation about copyright and how, and if you want to include an economic aspect in the relationship with your fans or not. I mean, that's all stuff that needs to be thought through and worked out, and will obviously be the final component of my thesis when I propose like what people could do as next steps.
Well, I think definitely you are challenging some of the set beliefs here, and I very much like that. Is there anything? Is there anything I should have asked you about, Lisa Marie, that I haven't? Something important to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think we've probably covered everything. I just hope that, I don't speak about my research very often publicly, and I'm a new academic, so I'm hoping that the way I put it forward had the kind of clarity it needed, outside of the academic speak that I'm used to doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you explained it well, and there's some mindset stuff here to think about in terms of how are we approaching our readers and how do we develop our worlds. And I think we tried throughout our conversation here to bring it a bit outside of theory and sort of become practical a bit as well to show, okay, how could we potentially do this? But I also like the fact that we can leave it a bit to the listener as well to think creatively about how can you engage with your readers and how can you enable them to become creator readers and be part of your world in whatever fashion that you like, because there's also some individuality here at play in terms of how much you feel comfortable with and how much do you want to engage with readers on this level. But I do think there's a lot of truth to the fact that if you can do this, this is one of the ways where you can combat that visibility issue that we all struggle with in today's landscape here when it comes to self-publishing. So I think that was excellent, and we had a very, very good conversation here. So all I want to say is thank you so much for coming on to the AmWritingFantasy podcast, Lisa Marie. And as I expected, this proved to be a very interesting conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I will be releasing a lot of this stuff in a more writer-focused, author-focused format, like non-academic format, as I progress in terms of courses and things like that. So if anybody's interested, they can just pop over to my website and sign up for my newsletter, and this stuff will be coming out in more detail as it progresses.
That sounds great. And, if you can email me the link to where people can go, and maybe also the link to, you mentioned some tools in the session here. So maybe if you can email me that stuff, then I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure.
And then listeners can just go straight through there to the show notes and just click through. That would probably be the easiest way to do it. And I know for sure, Lisa Marie, that I will sign up to your email list because I want to see what you come up with.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, so next Monday, Autumn is back on the podcast. And to be honest, we haven't quite worked out what topic we're going to cover just yet, but we'll definitely settle on something good.
If you like what you just heard, there's a few things you can do to support the AmWritingFantasy podcast. Please tell a fellow author about the show and visit us at Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review. You can also join Autumn and Jasper on patreon.com/AmWritingFantasy. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get awesome rewards and keep the AmWritingFantasy podcast going. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.